Captains of Industry is brought to you by the new BMW X5.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. I'm Gugulethu Mfuphi. Well, today we have the pleasure of speaking to Bruce Strong, a familiar name around the packaging industry. He's the Chief Executive of Mpact. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. I must say it's a pleasure speaking to you once again. Usually we talk about your numbers and results, but today we're going to get to know the man behind the company. But perhaps if you can give us a brief overview of Mpact. It's an amazing company that operates in diverse packaging spheres and actually touches a lot of South Africans' lives on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. So Mpact is a packaging company, as you've correctly mentioned. We make paper-based packaging and plastic packaging, mostly rigid plastic packaging. On the paper side, we are the biggest collectors of recycled paper in South Africa. We use that recycled paper to make packaging paper, and we use that packaging paper to make corrugated boxes typically. And some of the packaging paper is also used to make other packaging such as cereal boxes and things like that. It's on the paper side of our business. That constitutes about 75% of our business at the moment. On the plastic side, we've got a rigid plastics business, so 4 different businesses effectively. One makes big bulk bins for the agricultural sector, including wheelie bins, the type you would use for your refuse removal at home.
So can I call you next time when that bin gets stolen or lost?
I think you need to call your local municipality to start with. Anyway, and then we also produce in that business the crates that are used for retailers to distribute between distribution centers and the retail outlets. The second business in our plastics business produces preforms and closures. So preforms are basically the early stage of a Coke bottle, for example. So we produce between 50 and 60% of all the PET Coke bottles in South Africa. PET is just the plastic material that is used to make that bottle, certainly the 500 milliliter. We also produce jars and other closures in that business. The third business produces trays and films. Trays like styrene trays, for example, used for packaging meat, styrene clamshells used for the fast food industry, and also film that is used to wrap the meat, for example, and things like that. And finally, we produce blow molded products which are used in the FM, fast-moving consumer goods sector, for shampoos, home care, personal care, healthcare type products, typical bottles that you'd buy with your shampoo in or your home care products.
Sure, that's certainly quite far-reaching, and a lot of that also deals with manufacturing, which is a unit in your business. How are you finding the environment at the moment?
So there's no doubt manufacturers in South Africa are under pressure at the moment. I mean, I think that's well reported, and there's various reasons. Despite that, we still believe that there are still opportunities out there. You know, we've been faced with many years now of escalating electricity costs, found labor costs escalating beyond inflation, for example. More recently, we've had the impacts of the weaker rand on key raw materials going into the business and things like that. But having said that, while the environment is challenging, there are still some opportunities. One, in the local market, but also two, over border, you know, in neighboring countries and the rest of Africa, and we're looking to exploit those as well. So while we do find times quite challenging in the current environment, we are looking for opportunities, and we have generally built, I think, a culture which hopefully makes a plan and not too many excuses.
Quite true, because we all want our pizza to come in boxes, quite certainly. But the operating environment overall, when you look at South Africa versus the rest of the continent, where you also have operations, is the continent responding well to your services and products?
Yeah, look, we've got operations in Namibia, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, so our reach further afield is purely through exports at the moment. You know, 10% of our revenue approximately last year was derived from sales into the rest of Africa, in other words, outside South Africa. So it's still relatively small in our business. What we are seeing, there's no doubting the good growth prospects in many of the African countries, other African countries who also have the scale to support good packaging businesses. The key for us there is to exploit them in a profitable way over time. Our approach up until now has been quite a conservative one in the context of looking for the right opportunities and making sure we deliver long-term value to our shareholders. But there's no doubting those prospects and the need to assist those economies at the end of the day to deliver the packaging they require to meet the aspirations of the people in those countries.
Bruce, how important is innovation in the packaging sphere?
Innovation is absolutely essential, and you know, when one talks innovation, I think one must just make it clear from the outset, innovation is not only in the products, it's also in the processes within the business. So for example, you have products which it goes without saying, you know, product innovation is critical, especially with changing demographics, changing distribution models and things like that. If you're not innovating and bringing new ideas to the table, you're going to become irrelevant on the product side. In processes, I think that just the innovation that's required there is one of bringing down the cost of doing business to start with. Two, making sure your customers and all the people through the value chain and the supply chain have a clear view of where they are, and consequently they can also reduce their inventories and things like that. So innovation there is as important as product innovation. And just to quote, you know, Ellen Kuhlman, the CEO of DuPont, whom I see is out here, I think next week or this week. She mentioned some time ago, in the absence of innovation, price can only go down. And I think that applies across all sectors, and it's certainly true in packaging.
So true. But I want to come back to that. You've been in the packaging game for almost 20 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Take us back to your first job, because I understand you studied engineering and you also have a BCom, but what
Yeah.
brought you into the world of packaging?
Well, actually, my first job, I was an apprentice fitter and turner on a gold mine,
Sure.
straight after school. And it was 3 years from the time I left school until the time I actually started at university. So I worked my way through, and I had a bit of luck along the way. I was an engineer on a gold mine for a short period before joining Mondi in 1995. And since then, I've been involved in one form or another in the packaging and paper industry.
A very long time, but I want us to go back to your job as a fitter and turner. One
Yeah.
wouldn't imagine you as such, but
Yeah.
how big was your salary back then?
Well, I've got my first pay slip as an apprentice fitter and turner, and it was 136 Rand. But it was actually adequate. We were well taken
That's
care of. I
lunch
never
nowadays.
so I never felt deprived in those times. I mean, you know, you get by with less, and so it wasn't too bad. And I learned a lot getting through those ranks.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to packaging, you joined Mondi, been here for just under 20 years, and no doubt you certainly met a lot of challenges before you worked your way to the position that you're at right now.
Yeah,
Was
no,
that
look,
different
I mean,
coming
there's-
from an engineering and technical environment?
Yeah, so, you know, having joined Mondi, I was involved mainly in operations. You know, I had the good fortune of actually Tony Treyer, he gave me my first job in Mondi. He was the previous CEO of Anglo American, and prior to that of Mondi. And when I decided to move across out of a gold mine, the mine manager at that time, which was perhaps quite interesting for some, was Ian Cockrell. And he said to me, his advice to me is, don't go and work in a head office until you really have to. And so moving over to Mondi, I spent quite a lot of time in operations. It was only, you know, in the later years that I really moved to a central location. So I've had experience both locally and abroad in operations and in the markets, basically selling both paper and packaging.
You mentioned experience
making it.
abroad, yeah, and I understand that you spent some time in Europe. What was that environment like?
It was in Austria. Yeah, that was very good. I mean, I think the key there was to get an understanding of how things are done in those really developed economies. It was a great learning experience, and one which today has still got value for me.
And clearly you met certain strategies and perhaps influential people who thought differently, which you've implemented here.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's no doubt that it is important in these industries to have a network of skills and ideas, I guess, that can enhance your business. And today still, you know, many of those relationships and those contacts that were made are very valuable in developing our business here. You know, our business in Mpact actually runs on a very lean corporate structure. You know, we don't have a massive infrastructure, and consequently we rely on the expertise of various people across industries to help us ensure that we are abreast with the latest technologies, both in terms of what's coming and in terms of what we implement. And that time, I guess, did sow some of those seeds for us.
What did you make of the thinking back then, how South African managers, perhaps their thought processes versus those in more developed economies like Austria?
Well, there's no doubt that South African managers are exposed to a wide variety of challenges which others perhaps aren't exposed to. So I don't think we have to stand back for anybody, and that was clear even at that time. You know, you've seen many South African businesses develop extensively abroad, and so I don't think there's any difference whatsoever. In fact, if you were to measure on a number of factors, you probably find that we are exposed to a lot more at a lot younger age and have to deal with many more challenges than many managers outside. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that the challenges aren't severe there. I mean, the competition is probably great in certain sectors in some of those economies. But South African managers, and I must say operating staff to a large extent, are also up there.
So quite clearly, South African managers have a lot more to deal with, but they should use that to their advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
to get ahead in the game.
Yeah.
Quite true. Would you ever go back to Austria perhaps one day?
Well, to Europe. I mean, I think the world is a much smaller place than it was 30 years ago, and so people like myself and most others would go where the opportunities perhaps arise, and depending on your own aspirations, what you want. For the time being, I'm South African here, and I'm very happy here. And you know, while you know there's so many nice things in other countries, I think we are in the place of opportunity. South Africa has got an excellent opportunity to make a big impact in the rest of Africa, and certainly the sense that we get just talking to other business colleagues and peers is that South African companies are active and really looking to exploit those opportunities. So I think if there's one place to be in this world at the moment, we're in it, and that is in Africa.
Exactly. They say it's the next frontier market, so
Yeah.
quite clearly a good place to be. And
Absolutely.
I want to come back to the role of education. You also have a BCom, and you also studied engineering. What do you make of leaders? I know some, you know, there are a lot of people like Richard Branson, perhaps, who's one of the world's best known entrepreneur who got there without having some kind of formal education. But the role that education played in your life?
Yeah, look, I mean, education is an enabler at the end of the day. You know, it gives you tools to do certain things, but it doesn't actually do those things, you know. So you've got to apply that education to do something. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to good judgment, conviction, courage of your conviction, and the ability to implement things. And the education, I suppose, helps to develop some of those aspects. But it's not the ultimate thing, but it certainly is a big enabler. And I suppose when one looks at your own children, you say, you know, education is important because you want to give them the best chance that they can have. And I guess that's what we need to do, and what we are looking to do across our workforce, for example, you know, to provide the environment and the opportunities for people to educate themselves. But at the end of the day, it's up to those people to take up those opportunities and actually exploit them to their benefit, and to the benefit of the company, it must be said as well.
Exactly. Coming back to the thought leadership behind children and perhaps junior staff members that you have in your company, are there any particular tips of the trade or little bits of advice that you give them that perhaps help propel them further when it comes to their way of thinking? Yeah,
I suppose off the top of my head, I guess the one thing is to stop seeking the next thing and just do the thing you're doing for the start properly. You know, you often get into this stage, and I guess most people are there sometime in life, where they're always thinking only about the next thing. But the next thing often comes a lot quicker if you just do the thing you're doing well. And coupled with it, I suppose, is not to keep thinking or wondering what you're meant to be doing, because often the best thing you could be doing is the thing that presents its opportunity at that moment. And so I guess that would be my thought in that. I don't say it's rather off the top of my head, but I think that is important. You know, a lot of times people spend their lives trying to work out what the right thing is instead of just doing something, and often that something leads to the right thing, even if you create it yourself. So that would be my advice, I guess. Yeah.
Things work themselves out in any way.
And nothing happens if you're not moving. If you're not doing something, you can be sure nothing's going to happen.
Exactly, so true. Well, definitely lessons to be learned there. Well, we're going to take a quick ad break, but when we return, we'll continue speaking to Bruce Strong, the Chief Executive of Mpact. Welcome back to this week's edition of Captains of Industry, where we speak to Bruce Strong, the Chief Executive of Mpact, a packaging firm well known for its operations across sub-Saharan Africa. But Bruce, I want us to touch on leadership skills. You mentioned that your advice perhaps to your own children or to people across the board is to stay focused on what you're doing now, and things will work themselves out. For yourself and working your way rather to the top, the key leadership lessons that you learned on your way to being CEO.
I did touch on some of those. I think the four things that I'd consider most critical, actually, for myself and for anybody else. So one is to have good judgment, I think, and at least find ways of developing it if you don't. The other is to have conviction as a leader. If you've got good judgment, you've got conviction, you're halfway there. The third is to have courage, because good judgment with conviction without courage doesn't convert to anything. So you've got to have the courage of that conviction. And finally, you've got to have the drive to actually go ahead and implement the thing. So I'd say, if I was to sum up what the key things are from my perspective, those would be those four things.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at the internet and trying to compile some research on you, there wasn't really a lot there. Does this
Good.
perhaps identify the kind of person and personality that you have? You're a very private person and keep work separate and focus on the job?
Look, yeah, I would say, no, I'm not necessarily private, but I don't, running business nowadays is a full-time job. And so I certainly don't spend my life, putting things on the internet or making things available. And I guess we're a young company. We've been listed since 2011 as Mpact. It's been a really good time. And so the profile of the company is perhaps still emerging. And so that's perhaps why. But I'm certainly not trying to keep a low profile. But at the same time, I suppose one wants to just get on with the job and not spend your life trying to promote yourself.
Well, perhaps this interview will fish out a little bit more, hopefully. I understand that you're definitely not over 50.
No,
as
I'm
far as
45,
I understand.
actually.
Very young for a
Yeah.
CEO, and obviously you took over Mpact back in 2009 at the helm of the company since then. Did age play a factor? Do you find that you had to work a lot harder, perhaps to win people over or to prove your leadership abilities?
Yeah, I think that's always perhaps a case. I suppose everybody has a certain makeup at a certain time in their lives. And I suppose when you're younger, maybe you have a lot more energy and less wisdom. And as you grow, I suppose the wisdom increases and your energy maybe decreases, and you balance them. But generally speaking, I've had great support. We've got a really good team of people in our company, in Mpact, and they've all been supportive right from the outset. I've worked with many of them for many years. And so it hasn't really been a difficult period from that point of view. There's certainly been great support. We've got a board that has great experience. Our chairman is Tony Phillips. He was the CEO of Barlow World for many years. And we've got a number of non-executive directors who have got great experience in industry. So if you look at the pool of, we've got sufficient energy and wisdom to make sure that we move forward in a positive way.
And all of that is pulling onto you, that wisdom. But many people would look at you and say, you're quite young. In the next 10 to 15 years, what would be the bigger plan or the bigger picture or the bigger objective for you as an individual?
Well, perhaps I'd talk about our company to start with, because this is the most important thing at this stage. I mean, we're a young company as a listed company, although many of our operations have been around for many, many decades. So we announced recently the rebuild of our Felixton paper mill, which is in northern KwaZulu-Natal, a rural area where we're going to invest just short of 800 million rand into that factory, which is really exciting. And the idea there is to make sure that while we are a young company in the context of a listing, we have a long heritage, a very successful heritage. To give you an example, 2005, when we were formed in the current sort of structure that we have today, we had a turnover of 2.8 billion rand. In 2013, we announced our results 2 weeks ago. Our turnover was 7.7 billion rand. So that's a growth of just 14% per annum on a compound basis. And our profit has grown faster than that, at 15% per annum. And our challenge for the next 10 years now, our vision is to see that type of growth and profitability continue. And one has to look, it's about markets, it's about the products and the sectors that you're in, the regions and the geographies, and ensuring you've got the skills and the people within the business to deliver against our future aspirations. So we're very excited about that, and I suppose in one form or another my own ambitions are linked to those ambitions of the company, because I think that is the paramount importance here.
Well, that's a perfect legacy to leave behind, perhaps at such a huge corporate organization, is contributing to economic growth as well as touching people's lives in everyday things.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a legacy that extends to the whole company, and I think that is what we all aspire to at the end of the day as a company, is to leave more than just profit, but to leave something that makes a difference, and to exist for something that makes a difference beyond your profit. That is a key and a fundamental aspect of sustainability. But the long-term impacts of your business on communities, on the health and the environment and things like that, of paramount importance as well. And so as an engineer on the one hand and as a businessman on the other, we've got a great role to play in bringing food security and sorting that out. Packaging is a key function in food security. Just to give you an example, they say 75% or 3 to 5% of produce in developed markets doesn't actually reach consumers.
Sure.
In undeveloped markets, up to 40% of produce doesn't reach consumers. Now, you can attribute that to many factors. One could be infrastructure, refrigeration, things like that. But one of those factors is undoubtedly packaging. Coupled with that, the idea that 75%, I think it was, some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, a McKinsey study showed 75% of the world's unutilized arable land sits in sub-Saharan Africa. So, and you take food security as an issue, packaging players have a huge role to play in contributing to the solutions. And we're very excited to be in the sector, So while there's a lot to be spoken about in the short term, there's no doubt in South Africa we face some challenges as a packaging player and a producer of packaging, and one who wants to be relevant beyond, the immediate future. I think we are very excited about the role we can play.
I can imagine. That's a huge responsibility to hold on your shoulders regarding the amount of stakeholders that you have to respond to. How do you strike a work-life balance, if such a thing even exists, though?
Yeah, I mean, work-life balance is, it's often a good question. You talk to people and say you've got to have balance. But I think in life, you live in seasons, like I suppose all things, And so you have seasons, I suppose, where your work is more than it should be, I suppose. And seasons where you perhaps hoped or wished you had more work. And so I suppose from my own personal point of view, I'm probably in that season where there isn't perfect balance, and it's probably unrealistic to expect it, but I've got a very supportive family. And the people that I work with are also a great team of people, and we've got a great company. So I don't feel imbalanced, if I can say that. But I suppose the best way to test that is to ask the family what they think. But I think they would say it's quite balanced.
It's quite balanced. So you're always attending soccer matches and
quite
have occasional prize.
Sport. Yeah.
Coming back to the role of a chief executive, I think so often we view it as a prestigious position for anyone to hold within an organization, but it does come with its pressures. And perhaps that brings us to, what shareholders would like to know. What do you go to bed thinking about at night?
About work-life balance.
Board meeting or soccer game or braai with the guys?
No, look, if the question was, actually, when you asked that, I should maybe just diverge from it, because I decided that I would not take any of this electronic, no phone, no iPad, nothing into, sitting next to my bed, because invariably you pick it up at some point and then you don't sleep because you think about those things. You try and solve the world's problems overnight. So I stopped doing it. So if you ask what do I think when I go to bed, I try not to think about those things. But if you're asking what keeps me awake generally, what are the things that keep somebody like myself awake? I guess it is ensuring that you find profitable growth for your company, both in the short and long term, so sustainable profitable growth. And that you're able to remain relevant in the sectors and the markets in which you operate, and where you see you can't, that you can actually transform adequately. And transformation then on that topic goes not only about your products and your company offering, but in the way you operate your company. And you've seen a lot of transformation in South Africa, which has been very positive over the last years. And we've been very pleasantly surprised by the impact it's brought to our business in different thinking and different ways, and so it's actually very exciting from that point of view. So I guess those are the things that, if there was something keeping me awake, it would be that.
Well, good to know that it's perhaps a lesson that many other chief executives need to learn.
No,
keep the electronics away from the bedroom. That's quite true. But coming back, Bruce, to your age, it's just something that I'm in awe of, given the fact that you've managed to accomplish so much. What keeps you waking up in the morning to come back to Mpact and continue making a difference?
Well, we've got a very exciting environment here. We've got an exciting company, and it's about, I suppose, what keeps me excited is to make sure that continues, and to exploit the many opportunities that exist. Not without there's no doubting the challenges. They exist, and coupled with that, people often ask, so what's the, ask generally, not only myself but others, what's the best part of your job? You'd say the people. What's the worst part of your job? The people. Because it is, you've got the burden of leadership on the one hand, and I guess at the end of the day, it's also the burden of an element of service. So just working with so many different people, both within the company, customers, suppliers, and the broader community is actually a very stimulating and exciting thing. And what is also nice about, I suppose, a packaging company as opposed to perhaps a mining company is we have products you can touch every single day.
Exactly.
And you touch them. So if I walk into a shop, and I go shopping with my wife from time to time, I'm not buying things, I'm basically inspecting all the packaging down the aisles, being scrutinized by the security in the shop, wondering what I'm up to.
So now we'll know next time we bump into you in a grocery store.
Yeah.
But Bruce, perhaps to take this forward as well, I want to go back to that young artisan that you were many, many years ago. Well, not so many, given your age. If you could go back and give yourself any kind of advice, what would it be?
What would the advice be? You know, I suppose everybody has a path that you follow, and everybody has a story about how you got wherever you got to. And I'm happy with the story that I have. You know, it could have been maybe different in some areas. It wasn't without challenges, but I was fortunate. You know, I've had good luck in my life. And so I suppose from that point of view, I don't have too many regrets.
Sounds to me like we need to stop playing a song here, that you did it your way.
No. Look, I mean, there are many challenges along the way, but yeah, I suppose they're not to be unexpected.
Ultimately, you managed to overcome. Bruce, it's such a pleasure speaking to you and getting to know a little bit more about you, even though it's not all over the internet. But thanks so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that does bring this week's edition of Captains of Industry to an end. Do join us again next time where we speak to another captain of industry.